shortly, I'm sure, as soon as they hear my voice. So I hope you had a good session there. So I thought that was a really fascinating morning. And for me, the major difference between where we are now and where we were 12 months ago was the participation we had from the beneficial cargo owners, the corporates there being in front of us, telling us what their issues are, telling us that they already get the benefits from digitalization, and that there is something that they want to participate in very quickly. Also interesting to hear from the ASEAN Secretariat that this isn't something that governments can do on their own. Why would they? Why would they want to have harmonization? That will take you a month of Sundays. So it is down to industry to do it. But industry too can't do it alone. Otherwise, we'll have another trade lens. So there needs to be a joint effort coordinated by the likes of the Centre for Digital Trade Innovation and the ICC in order to make this happen. And with your support and with your assistance, I think we could probably do it and meet the requirements that we've heard about so effectively this morning. So let's look further about what we're going to do. What are the practical next steps that we can take? Now, one of the most important documents involved in international trade, you probably don't need me to tell you, is the Bill of Lading. And the Bill of Lading, being a document of title, is one of those that is affected by the introduction of the Electronic Trade Documents Act. And as more countries adopt MLETR across the globe, will soon become a major digital capability that is provided and will be the underpinning of digital trade processes more generally. So to discuss how this can be done in practice and the benefits behind the digitalization of the Bill of Lading, I'm very pleased to introduce Ayesha Ali, who's the Deputy Director in charge of Digital Trade and Telecoms at the Department of Business and Trade, who has a very distinguished panel who are going to discuss that issue. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to you, Ayesha. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for the very warm introduction. Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about how the world has changed from where we were previously. You know, whether it's buying your coffee through your smartphone or sharing money electronically, we are not where we were some years back. And I'm really pleased to say that trade as well has changed over the years, where we're moving from sort of manual documents to electronic transactions. And we've spoken about the bills of lading and how we're removing the bills of lading into more electronic form. My role in the Department for Business of Trade, we negotiate trade agreements, whether that's in the bilateral fora or in the multilateral fora. So we negotiate digital trade provisions with our international partners across to ensure that we can have international collaboration on these important issues. And then we also work with organizations like the ICC and other businesses to ensure that the work that we do is something that is sort of implementable and is what is needed domestically. But I'm not going to get into the details of what we're doing at DBT today. I'm really pleased to be here with this fantastic panel. We've spoken about, discussing the joint efforts and the level of collaboration. And what I'd like to focus on today is talk a bit more about how we can learn from the panel here on how they've been adopting trade digitalization in their organizations and what they've learned with the process and how we can move on from there. So without further ado, I'm going to kickstart with my first question around best practice. We've had quite a bit of that discussion today, but bringing it in the form of bills of lading and removing bills of lading, what sort of best practice can we learn from the panel today from their various organizations? And I might kickstart with my colleague on my right, Lars, if you'd like to introduce yourself and how that's worked for you.
Thank you very much, Cher. And I'm Lars Karlsson. I'm the Global Head of Trade and Custom Consulting at AP Møller-Maersk, a company known to many of you as the biggest mover of goods. We used to be also defining ourselves as an ocean shipper, which has been discussed here in the morning. We don't do that anymore because we are changing, the industry is changing, the world is changing. Today, we define ourselves as an integrator of trade because what we do work with every day is the digitalization of the supply chain. And I basically have three words for you. It is supply chain visibility. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that in this opening introductory remark. Because, of course, there's no doubt, and we heard it this morning as well, that the trade and customs digitalization, border digitalization, and data is the big game changer here. What we just need to do now is making it practical, operational, and connectivity of it, right? And that's what we heard from the other panels as well. So that's what we are really focusing on right now. We are working with it. Many others are doing the same thing, and we try to make it work. Of course, it's great to be here because this specific event and the panel is very timely because, again, the Electronic Trade Documents Act, the Electronic Bill of Lading, the digital standardization initiative, these are the right things to do, and others are following this. But again, we need to make it work for everybody there. We can only do that in partnership. So I have two things I want to mention in the beginning. One is we need to start seeing the border as an isolated thing. The border used to be a line on the when I started 40 years ago in this business, it was basically a line on the ground. It's not anymore. The border starts here. When I order a ticket to travel or I buy something online, that's the first piece of information where the border starts, and that is about digitalization of data. It's already picked up. So we need to pick it up somewhere, and we need to use it, right? Which means that border is a nice thing. There's one thing that is very special about it. It just doesn't have one side. There's another side as well. That's the whole point with the border. So we need to start looking into how can we actually connect these dots and start thinking about not making one border the best border in the world, because it doesn't help if the other side of the border is not. So we need to start looking at supply chains, trade corridors, where is the goods going from UK exporters? How is it going? How can we work together to make those specific examples work? That's where we see also the best practice example when we've been looking at specific trade lanes, trying to use what we have in digital means today, which is not only supply chain visibility data, picking up data from origin to destination, but it's also vetting all stakeholders in that supply chain, data about everybody involved. And the third piece is, of course, smart container data, different type of electronic means to follow the goods, supervise it all through. And if all of that data, and this is the really good news here, is of course that we are super optimizing the supply chain, and many are doing that, not only us, but our competitors and our partners as well, between borders. We now need to do it end to end, because a new global value chain that we've had for years is very integrated already. Goods passes border 4 or 5 times during a production cycle. Then we need to make the border part of that supply chain. By, again, the good news is, what do government agencies need? Well, they need pre-arrival, safe and secure data for risk management to be able to make the border more predictable and resilient, which is what we all need. So we're really talking about trusted supply chain, digital supervision. And the final point then would be connectivity. We need to make this operable. That's what I was talking about in the last panel. I've heard 2 times TradeLens mentioned as a failure. It's not a failure. For us in Maersk, it wasn't a failure. It was expensive learning. We learned from it. Now, we're not doing the same mistakes again. Of course, we wanted it to be a global open platform. It couldn't be because it started the wrong way. So again, the learning was there that we need to do these type of things together. International institutions, government agencies and governments, and private sector. Then we can also make these type of platforms open. We can make them connected. We can make them work. Thank you.
Thank you. Some really core points there around connectivity. And I think that's the beauty of trade, that there are so many different moving parts, but then sometimes understanding those different moving parts can be a challenge. But just learning a bit more about best practice from the panel. Jane, would you like to share some thoughts?
Yeah. Firstly, I think I'd like to say is please don't use me as an example of best practice. I've done what I can do with the information I've got, is what I'm trying to say. I'm a small to medium enterprise. I have just 20 staff, and we ship all over the world a product called gasket paper. I feel like I am in a funnel, and above me is all these amazing ideas, these amazing concepts are coming up, but they're being very, very slow to trickle down to me as a small to medium enterprise at the bottom. So I'm doing what I can. I recognise the bill of lading as being the most wonderful thing, and I just can't wait to get started. But how? How do I get started? Where's the information? I know you guys out there have it. You've got to start funneling it down to people like me. So I won't call it good practice, best practice. What we've done as an interim measure is we've gone, and I won't even say it's digital, we've gone paperless. So we've moved all of our documents into scanned PDF formats. We have folders for each customer, which holds the end-to-end audit trail. If we ever got caught by HMRC for anything, we can prove all the documentation. We've started to ask, and this is with the onset of the ebill, we've started to ask carriers to do express bills of lading, but to withhold the express bill until we go, we've had the money. So the ebill for us is, it sounds amazing, and I really can't wait to get started with it. Traditionally, our most secure, we use the whole range of payment methods. So you've got your credit terms where, hey, I might not get paid, through to a documentary collection, which will cost me about £300. I'll get a terrible exchange rate, and it'll probably take 6 weeks to get the money come through. Whereas with an e-bill of lading, with a bill of lading, I can say, customer, I have made your goods, they're on the seas. Here's a piece of document which I'm going to hold on to till you've paid me. Thank you for the money. Now we'll do an exchange of documentation. A bill of lading is amazing. It's simple. It's not particularly costly. Yes, you have to courier. Yes, there's time involved. So for me, please, I want to get started with the e-bill as soon as possible. Get me solutions and ways I can do it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Emmanuelle.
Thank you. Emmanuelle, again, for those who don't know me, I work at the World Trade Organization, where I lead work on small businesses and on trade digitalization. Let me maybe just comment on a few points that were made. What you said, Lars, is actually music to my ears. What we've seen over the past few years is very, very good progress, in my view. There's good momentum. So we see advancements on the legislative front with the ETDA, as you mentioned. We see some movement also on the industry front. The FIT Alliance, BIMCO this morning was mentioning the fact that they will move to 25% of bills of lading by 2025, maybe even earlier. So very good momentum. And we start seeing also borders being included, but here we actually need to move one step further. This integration that you were mentioning, Lars, in my view, is what we need to make happen if we really want to digitalize trade end to end. We're seeing some movement on that front, but the different initiatives that are taking place have a lot of very good lessons, very positive impact, but they are still very much developed in silo. And so we need to be able to connect these dots in a more proactive way, in a more efficient way, if we want to make it happen. And indeed, I mean, customs are a key stakeholder in international trade. So we need to find a way to make all these people work together and align on standards, on data, and pass the legal framework. So to me, if we really want to move it to the next stage, that's what we need to focus on from now on.
Thanks very much. And Peter, has your experience been similar in terms of best practice, whether it's about integration or information awareness?
I think with integration, it is the key thing, because the problem is, if you take the air industry, for instance, I mean, I've been involved in electronic messaging since the start of the 90s, maybe earlier, and the uptake was a struggle, because the beneficiary was the airlines. They would save an awful lot of money with increased productivity, not having to take tons of paper across on their aircraft, but they were unwilling to give any sort of incentive or financial incentive to the actual people who were taking the pain, which were the forwarders who have to develop the systems. And the problem with international trade is there are a lot of people very isolated from each other that do particular tasks, and they may be under pressure to do digital this, digital that, digital whatever, and they only see the cost, not the benefit, and the benefit is their customer, and that can be sometimes difficult to explain to them, or to convince them that they should embrace this new technology because it's beneficial for everybody. So I think there needs to be a more holistic view of the end to end, and not just focus on the bit that I do, and that's the bit that I want to make money out of, and try and spread the love.
Organization, how would you say you've done that in terms of engaging them and getting the customers to understand the end to end?
It's difficult, actually, because although people are involved in international trade, you find a lot of them don't actually understand more than their little bits.
Yeah.
So the hardest thing is trying to encourage people. I mean, people that ship Ex Works aren't interested in anything other than getting the goods ready and saying they're ready, come and get them. On the other extreme, you've got, you know, DDP, delivery duty paid. And that's the only one, in my view, that people can actually control the thing, because they're responsible for the whole thing end to end. They see the benefits at different stages. But it's a real struggle. You know, you've got to talk to people and explain areas of the supply chain that they aren't aware of. So it's complex.
It's complex. Sounds good. Niles, let's not forget my colleagues on screen as well. Would you like to share bits on best practice and how you found trade digitalization?
Yes, of course. Thank you, and thanks for having me participating online. I would rather be with you guys in the call, especially when I see I'm so big on screen. Apologies for that. I'm a bit in your face, right? Never mind. So a couple of things I would like to share and also respond to what the colleagues in the panel have just said. So just to be very frank, we are, I'm head of digital trade at the Digital Container Shipping Association. So we are an organization, a standards body, if you like, an organization founded by 9 of the 10 largest container carriers to basically support the industry with digitalization, right? And as head of digital trade, one of our biggest topics, what my team is working on, is obviously the bill of lading. And I would say we're facilitating the creation of best practices, if that makes sense. So we're here to facilitate the digitalization, and we do that on the basis of standards that we develop. So for example, for the bill of lading, together with our members, we have developed the standards for that. And when we refer to standards, it includes process standards, data standards, and if you like, the protocols. So how do we communicate the data? And for me, that is what the digitalization is about, right? So removing paper is one thing, but actually putting data to work, that is what we're all looking for. And that is, if you like, best practices. So we strongly believe that that standards are the foundation, basically, for best practices, right? And if we want to really, as an industry, transform, standards are our bread and butter, obviously, but we firmly believe that that is the basis or the foundation, if you like, for digitalization. So in terms of what can we do, right? And I think Jane said it very rightfully. Where's the information? So how do I actually get started? Now, there's a couple of initiatives already also mentioned by Emmanuelle. So the BIMCO has their 25 by 25 pledge. We, as the DCSA, we have our 100% commitment of the CEOs of our members on ebills in 2030. And that is obviously a very strong commitment and a very bold statement, but it's also very much an invitation to others in the industry. I think what is key in order to enable digitalization at full scale in the industry is the collaboration. So our members committing to 100% EBL in 2030 is one thing. It's a promise that they will be ready, and actually they will be ready much earlier. So they're not going to wait to 2030. They're going to probably, or they are all already working on it. Most of our members are actually already capable of issuing EBLs. And by the end of the year, they all will be able to do that on the basis of data. But then it's for the rest of the industry to participate, right? And also to, if you like, invest in that in order to make it happen and get the benefits of that. But it's again back to Jane's point. So where's the information? So what I would very much like to stress here is two things. One is, and it sounds like a minor thing, but it's actually quite extensive. The FIT Alliance, so the Future of International Trade, which consists of BIMCO, ICC, SWIFT, FIATA, and ourselves. We've in February 2020, we got together and formed a group in order to advocate for the usage of EBLs. If you go to fitalliance.org, you will find a lot of information about how to get started. So we call that the complete guide to EBL. That gives you a lot of pointers. So what EBLs are, how to get started. There are obviously solution providers out there that can help you to get started. But I think it's also, and that's my second point, I think it's also very necessary for everybody, probably here in the room and probably around this event, right, that understand the benefits that digitalization, specifically when it comes to trade documents, who understands the benefits of that, need to go and evangelize that with their trade partners, right? There are so many people out there that haven't heard of it, that don't understand the benefits, which is all very understandable because it's so massive. What is the impact for me? But those that are familiar to it, those that have been working on it, those that have experience, please share that message with your trade partners, because one thing is very clear specifically when it comes to the bill of lading. Digitalization breaks whenever there's one party that actually doesn't join that movement, and then we're stuck, right? So it's also our duty. And when I say our, I hope I can speak to all of you in the room to start evangelize the usage and the benefits that EBLs bring in order to, you know, really address this topic as an industry. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, no, it does. Can I pick up on your earlier point around standards, though? And you spoke around harmonizing standards. Are you able to expand a bit more about that? So if an organization is looking to explore that further for themselves, you know, what are the sorts of things that you've considered as part of that approach?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I used the word harmonize, and if I did, then apologies, but because that's not necessarily what I meant. So what we do as DCSA, we develop digital standards with our members. And again, when we refer to digital standards, it comes with a lot of artifacts, but mostly it's about the process, the data, and the protocols, right? So how do we communicate this data? And what is for us very, very necessary, and that's also in line with the conversation that was held before us around interoperability, we need to make sure that the sender and the receiver are capable of, or that they are communicating or basically talking the same language, right? Which we try to facilitate through the development or through providing standards. Our standards are open source, free for everybody to use. So you can just navigate to our website, dcsa.org, and there you can find all of the standards that we have been working on over the last 5 years and published. But it's also very important to understand that our standards are aligned with the standards of BIMCO, right? Specifically the standards for the bill of lading, with the standards of FIATA, so the organization that represents the freight forwarders, but also with UNCFACT, right? With the multimodal transport framework, if you like. So, and that is facilitating interoperability. So it's very important, again, if we really want to get the benefits out of this as an industry, that we start talking the same language, and that if we share data, we know what we're sharing, and that the receiver is actually capable of receiving the data that was intended and shared with by the sender.
Great. I think that stirred up some thoughts in the panel. Emmanuelle.
And to the question about standards. So we've been talking a lot about that interoperability of standards. I think we're among people here who believe in trade digitalization, think that it's a good thing and that we should accelerate work. And let me be a little bit provocative now. I think we need to change our narrative. I think talking about interoperability of standards is actually making more harm than good, because for many people who are not convinced by trade digitalization, it can be seen in a negative manner. Now, this morning, Hannah said that a big part of the work that the DTC is doing is to move away from documents to data elements. And I think this is crucial. This is what we need to be talking about. We shouldn't be talking about so much about standardizing documents. We need to be talking about data elements so that we can digitalize the entire supply chain end to end. So what I think we should be talking about is not about interoperability of standards. We should be talking about developing a global trade data model. We have some data models. We have a WCO data model, which is not open, by the way, so we can discuss it. But anyway, but what we need, if you really want to digitalize trade, is a global trade data model. And I think this is the message that we should be really like pushing out if we want to bring trade digitalization to the next level.
Lars, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, no, I think you said it really well, right? I think that is about also the agile, what we call agile standardization, which is harmonization rather, right? You know, what actually works. And I think there are 3 things that can drive this process if we really want to make a difference. One is, of course, predictability. That is what trade is looking for, our clients are looking for. resilience all over, so you don't get delays, you don't get problems with your end delivery. And the third one is cost, of course, which is extremely important to all of us, including SMEs. And we can only do that if we actually look at two ways of doing that. And that we definitely are blockers here. And I think that we need to look at simplification as well, because it's really easy to add on things, to add on new regulations, new data requirements, whatever. We very rarely remove things. So when we talk about, for instance, standardization, harmonization of trade documentation and digitalisation, we have one now, e-bill of lading. There's two more really important ones and about 40 more. Is there 40 more? Maybe there's only 20 more or 10 more. We should maybe remove half of it because it was invented 20 years ago. We have other ways of doing it today. So simplification is really important because it removes cost, which is one of your problems and issues. And the other one is, how do you access this, right? So the silo thing you mentioned before, and others have mentioned as well, is the second thing that we need to look at in several different ways. We're still working in silos. And we need to start looking into the supply chain, as you said before as well, in a different way. Where is the goods actually moving? How are you interacting with them? And SME is not using other ships or other airplanes or other service providers. They basically use the same process as a multinational. So we need just to make it possible for them to interact with it. And there's also the silos of then how we do this. So again, examples that best practice that have been mentioned. What we need to do in the future is hyper focus on those things that actually makes a difference and work everyone with them instead of all of these different initiatives that is out there. And that is not easy. That is again, need agile harmonization and standardization. Maybe like, again, the Electronic Trade Documents Act, which moved one step above instead of being very detailed regulating stuff. Maybe a global data model, at least not adding on only new things. Bruna mentioned this tsunami of ESG regulations, which is supply chain regulation. It's all supply chain, it's end to end, it's all tiers of the supply chain. You need to apply that as well. So trade compliance will become the license to play in the future. Now, how do we do that? The only way we can do it is connecting the dots of the data and keeping it at the minimum with a data model.
This brings me to my sort of next question, and we've dotted on this in previously, is around information awareness. So simplification sounds great. The data model sounds great. But I guess, how do we do this, and how do we ensure that SMEs and others have the right information to go about with this sort of stuff? Jane, do you want to share some thoughts on, on the information side? We've spoken about, there are many dispersed players. So I guess, what kind of information would be useful in this regard if we were to do these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, most people who sell overseas know what they're doing. Let's say that first of all, we know what we're doing. The problem we have is getting joined up methods of controlling it. So I'm using an accounting package that isn't capable of producing a commercial invoice, so it requires rekeying of data. I'm producing documents into a PDF format, and then I'm sending them to the Chamber of Commerce to give me an electronic certificate back. I'm sending them to somebody else to do me an export declaration. I'm sending them to the customer. It's wrong. I can't even begin to describe how wrong it is. It could be so similar and simple rather. And I think data elements absolutely is the way to go forward, is we can put the information into one area, and that one area can produce all of those documents that you need. I want to say it's simple. The concept is simple. The actual enactment of it, I realize, would be much more difficult than that. But I think it is what we have to do. We have to come up with something common, rather than somebody using Sage, somebody using Xero, somebody rekeying the data into something else. Give us something we can all actually work with that's easy and isn't going to cost the earth.
Great, thanks. And Peter, do you want to add on the information gap? And I guess, how do we go about closing it?
I think I'd just carry on from Jane's point. I think the trouble with a single system and intercommunication between different bodies is you set a standard and everybody interprets it slightly differently. If you take the IATA FWB, for instance, there's one standard, and yet back in the 90s there was at least 30 or 40 different versions of ostensibly the same data set. So whilst it's very tempting to have one model and everybody puts it in there, it's difficult to achieve. So I'm tempted on the one hand, you know, to focus on the, okay, let's get the bill of lading. This is what we're supposed to be talking about. Let's get the bill of lading digitized. But that, of course, only solves a certain amount of problems, and it gets others. If you look at the overall picture, is it too much? You know, how do you eat an elephant a bite at a time? But is that the way we go? I think the real thing, as probably Lars mentioned, and Emmanuelle, was, you know, make it simple.
Yeah.
Because there are so many things that we do because we've always done it that way. But what do they actually achieve? Is there something that has a value? And that's what we should focus on, I think.
Great. And in terms of driving that simplicity, you know, would that be industry, or who do you look to?
I think government like a bit of complication. You know, that's the problem.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you know, people only do things if they have to. So that there is a case for legislation. It'll be interesting to see how much the e-commerce trade bill has actually what impact that's had, because that doesn't oblige. Well, it does oblige people to do it, but it's not quite the same as a hard enforcement of something. So I think you need to strike a balance between enforcing things and encouraging people. But again, I think people have to see the benefit. There has to be a financial incentive, otherwise it just doesn't work. People aren't going to incur cost just because, oh, it's a great idea and it makes things better.
Yeah. Although in theory, you know, making things simplistic would reduce the cost because it improves efficiency and reduces time, etc.
Yeah.
So we spoke also about not working in silos, and I guess, you know, part of that method of sort of driving that simplicity is working together and using forums like these and learning through each other. I know, Niels, you spoke about sort of removing silos. Do you want to come in a bit more on, you know, how moving forward, I guess, you know, we've spoken about the obstacles, we've spoken about best practice, but if we were to take this a bit further, how would we do that with our networks?
Yeah, so again, I think it's critically important to really tackle this as an industry, right? And again, I want to emphasize that those that see the benefits and those that are keen to move forward and maybe be the early adopters, go and communicate or go and have the conversations first of all with your carriers, right? If you're not doing it yet, with your carriers, to tell them like, hey, you know, I want to get this bill. Not on paper, not on PDF, but in data. Obviously, it requires investment at your end as well. You need to make sure that you can actually receive the data either through your own systems or through your service providers, right, or your solution providers. But go and tell that you want to get the bill of lading going forward in data. And then start communicating with your trade partners, because again, if your trade partners are not ready, it doesn't make sense for you to, or not willing to join. It doesn't make sense for you to change, right? So it's a bit of a, I don't want to put it, but it's a bit of a all or nothing, right? We are all in it, or we should not bother, because if we're not jointly going to do this, then it's not going to be effective. Just very quickly on the point that Peter also made, I think it's yes, I agree. There's probably guys out there that don't necessarily mind that it's somewhat difficult, but I would very much try to or encourage us as an industry to take this forward rather than to wait for regulation, right? Because if it's dependent on regulation, then it's probably not going to be precisely how we as an industry would actually want it to be taken forwards. And that very much goes also in line with what Lars just said. I mean, innovation, yes, please. Probably we need to make sure that we first are making sure that we all talk the same language, right? Or that we are in the digitalization journey, a bit of ahead in the digitalization journey before we can really start removing, as we call it, documents. But I very much subscribe to that as well. But that's also a thing that we need to do together, right? So I think it's a bit of a buzzword by now, but collaboration is one of the key things in order to get this going.
Great, thank you. And I think, Lars, you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, just a short one on the fact we have talked about another element that could be fed into this discussion, both when it comes to silos and when it comes to simplification, that is trust. So we need to build in trust. And in fact, digitalization of trade itself builds better possibilities for trust, because you can actually have compliance records that are more digital, and by that they're easier to analyze and so forth. And let's face it, government agencies have huge amounts of data already today from all of us that is in this room that is in labor and trade, including your exports and whatever. And of course, those trade compliance records need to be acknowledged and needs to be a part of this discussion. And when we talk about simplification, that is one of the bases we need to have to actually use the risk type of element and low risk and high risk, and actually there need to be incentives.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that is what people are looking for to make this happen, right?
Yeah.
And the final point on that would be that we really need to make this a little bit more practical. Again, government agencies in some of the best practices we've seen has more difficulty exchanging data between themselves in governments than actually between private sector and government. Or private sector to private sector. And again, it's built by trust, and it's also about legacy systems and legacy legislation that we need to be innovative to get around. And it's really time now. There's no excuse anymore, right? It's good to have these meetings, but a little bit less conversation, a little bit more action, right?
Yeah. Great. Any further final thoughts from the panel on Emmanuelle?
Yes, maybe so on this question on how to bring it to the next level. We've heard about the importance of collaboration, of connecting the dots. And back to the question of narrative. So I talked about the global trade data model, but there's another dimension of the narrative that I think is very important and that we need to work on. I think the economy case for the business has been made very well in case of in the sense of what they can gain from trade digitalization. It's not the same with customers, for example, and the narrative is not the same. Customers don't really care about reduction in trade costs, but they care about risk assessment.
Of course they do.
But there's there's this dimension of risk which is huge, and that point hasn't been made in a way that can bring them on board. So I think we need to work a bit on the narrative. I think there are actually 3 actions that we should take, and I would say they fit in 3 letters, NMP. So N is the narrative, to nudge people, all the stakeholders, to really move and bring trade digitalization to the next level. The second one is a mapping of what's happening, because there's so much happening. On the private sector side, we mentioned a number of initiatives, FIT Bingo, all the ebills of lading initiatives, the DSI, there are initiatives also by governments, a number of pilots with very interesting lessons learned. There are initiatives by MDBs, and there's some overlap. And I think it would be very helpful to do a sort of mapping to know who does what and how we can better connect the dots and work together. So mapping to move trade digitalization. And the last one, the P, is about a sort of pact among these different movers of trade digitalization. So global pact for trade digitalization to power trade digitalization, and so that they commit to doing certain things. Some have already committed. We heard BIMCO, FIT, but it would be great to have a bit more commitments from all those actors who are working already, but in bits and pieces in different silos. So that's my proposal to really work on these 3 fronts to nudge, move, and power trade digitalization.
Well, we in government, we love acronyms. So, you've given us an acronym to work with. I think the mapping thing is a really interesting one. And we were speaking earlier as well around sort of, the different interlinkages and, the ability to just sort of network it all together. So that's clearly definitely something to consider. Peter, did you want to come in on that point?
I was just mulling over what Jane was saying about different systems, because I mean, if you start with simple things, is there an electronic communication between the buyer and seller? So for instance, if you get an order, does it come electronically? If it comes into your system, how many times do you have to rekey it? So do we need to focus on the start? Because unless somebody creates a digital document that the buyer and seller agree contain the relevant, correct information, you've got no chance. Because if somebody comes in halfway through the supply chain and alters, makes a difference. How do you deal with that? And I think as well, it coming back to the bill of lading. The problem with the airway bill and the bill of lading is generally they're created by somebody that's 1 million miles away from where the cargo is, and probably less in the sea freight world, but more certainly in the air freight environment. You produce your e-airway bill.
Yeah,
Somebody loads the cargo that's supposed to be there, but actually you've got 3 bits missing or 4 bits more, and then you get into, is the document wrong? Who knows it's wrong?
Yeah.
Who can change it? And all those practical things, I
Practical
think,
points.
are
Yeah.
something we need to really figure out, because
Yeah.
that's when the real world happens. You know,
Yeah.
it's all very well us exchanging data. That's great, but actually, you know, at some
how
point
does it
you've
actually
gotta-
transpire?
Yeah.
Yeah,
you've
no,
got-
and I think it brings us back to the connection point. I'm very conscious of time and want to give the audience a chance for questions. So I think we have a mic going around and there's some hands at the back.
Hi, my name is Vishrut. I'm from Yoda Plus. We are a blockchain-based EBL provider based on open standards. This is a very informative session. My question is to Niels. With the various blockchain network-based EBLs, which are Militer compliant, how do you ensure interoperability when they're on different networks?
Thank you.
Thank you for raising the question. It's an interesting topic. Obviously, we haven't talked a bit about, of not so much about lack of interoperability between EBL solution providers, but we as DCSA and as well as our members, as well as the solution providers themselves, actually see this as a blocker to really scale. So we as DCSA are working on together with the IGP and I approved solution providers to enable interoperability, which is an API based solution, or if you allow a protocol, we call it the EBL envelope. And that is because, so we don't think it's a matter of connecting blockchains. The solution providers all have their specific technologies, right? Some are blockchains, some are simply a bit more, let's say, old-fashioned ways of working, a database based on database structures or architectures, which perfectly works as well, and how to connect these, right? So we've come up with what we call the EBL envelope, which is again based on API communication, and then the how that then works at the ends of the solution providers and their respective blockchains. That's, I mean, I don't think that we can solve that, or that is solvable by in some sort of overarching framework or so. And the EBL envelope, what we have developed, has been tested and works. So that is the way, at least, how we try to enable interoperability in the industry. I'm happy to also, it's a bit weird maybe to say, but take this question offline and have a one-on-one with you to further elaborate.
Thank you very much, Niels. I think we may have, do we have time for one more? No, we don't. Okay, great.